She built a billion-dollar empire, yet 20 first-class passengers stared at her as if she'd crawled out of the cargo hold, their whispers hissing through the cabin like slow poison. "Ma'am, are you absolutely certain you belong here?" the flight attendant asked, each word dripping with disdain. The discreet Patek Philippe Calatrava beneath her sleeve, a watch that cost more than his annual salary, went unnoticed as he focused on her skin. What he didn't know, in 3 minutes she would decide whether his entire airline lived or died. Vivian Ward felt the weight of eyes on her back as the silver-haired executive in 1B leaned toward his seatmate. "Richard, call the purser," he stage-whispered, swirling his pre-flight champagne. "There's clearly been a boarding mistake." His practiced voice, one accustomed to being obeyed, carried precisely far enough to humiliate. The leather seat cooled against her silk blouse as Vivian straightened her spine. "Yes, I'm sure," she replied, voice steady despite the heat crawling up her neck and the thundering in her chest. She extended her boarding pass, the first-class ticket she'd earned through 20 years of cracking glass ceilings and navigating boardrooms where she was perpetually the only black woman present. The flight attendant, Jack Dawson, according to his gleaming name tag, examined it with theatrical scrutiny, his manicured fingers lingering too long on the paper. A woman across the aisle pretended to study her magazine, but watched through mascara-heavy lashes. Behind Jack, the silver-haired man in the tailored Brioni suit leaned further into the aisle, his bold Rolex catching the light as he gestured dismissively. "There must be some mistake," he announced, voice pitched to Carrie. "This section is for premium travelers." The cabin smelled of fresh leather and Clive Christian perfume, but now Vivian detected something else, the acrid scent of prejudice, barely masked by protocol. The soft ambient lighting that had seemed elegant moments ago now felt like a spotlight, illuminating her difference in this sea of entitlement. "I'm sorry," Jack said, not sounding sorry at all, his lips twitching almost imperceptibly, "but there seems to be a seating issue. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the main cabin while we sort this out?" More comfortable, as if her discomfort was the issue, not their thinly veiled bigotry, as if she hadn't spent her entire life calibrating her voice, her clothes, her very presence to make others comfortable with her excellence. Vivian stood, smoothing her understated silk blouse. No flashy designer logos, nothing that screamed success. She'd learned long ago that true power moved quietly. She'd been flying incognito to perform her final assessment before signing the rescue package that would save Meridian Airlines from bankruptcy. As she walked down the aisle toward the back, dignity intact but heart hammering against her ribs, she felt the collective judgment of the first-class cabin following her like a shadow. No one spoke up, no one met her eyes. A flight attendant at the economy divider actually flinched when their gazes connected. They didn't know she had memorized their faces, every smirk, every averted glance cataloged with perfect clarity. They didn't know that her signature, or its absence, would determine whether Meridian Airlines survived the quarter. They didn't know that the woman they'd just humiliated controlled the $2.7 billion lifeline that would determine the fate of their jobs, their pensions, their futures. Vivian took her new seat in economy, the scratchy fabric a stark contrast to the butter-soft leather she'd left behind. She opened her laptop, its blue light illuminating the controlled fury in her eyes, and made a single phone call. 10 minutes later, the cabin lights flickered. The engines, which had been humming in preparation for takeoff, fell silent with an ominous whine. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, uncertainty bleeding through his professional tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that this flight has been grounded indefinitely." Hello, my lovelies at Deucical Tales. I hope you're all cozy wherever you're watching from. How is everyone doing today? If you haven't already joined our Deucical family, now might be the perfect time to subscribe. I have a feeling this story might touch some hearts. The question hanging in the air was deafening. Who had the power to ground an entire commercial flight with just one phone call? And what would happen to those who'd created this perfect storm of humiliation? 3 years earlier, Vivian Ward had stood in the rain outside McKinley Capital's headquarters, watching water soak through her only decent pair of shoes, Ferragamos she'd saved for 6 months to purchase. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman soaked but unbowed, clutching a presentation folder containing salvation for a dying airline. The board had just rejected her proposal to save Meridian Airlines, not because the numbers didn't work, they were immaculate, but because they couldn't see past her gender and skin color to trust the brilliance behind her eyes. One board member actually checked his watch 3 times during her presentation, as though her voice was merely inconvenient noise. "They'll never let you in, Vivian," Thomas Ripley had told her afterward in the marble lobby, his voice gentle but patronizing, as he offered him his monogrammed handkerchief. As CFO of McKinley, he'd championed her work publicly while undermining it privately, a betrayal she'd discovered through a misdirected email. "The airline industry is dying anyway. Let it go. Know your limitations." Limitations. The word had followed her since childhood, whispered by teachers, shouted by rejections, implied in every room where she was the only one who looked like her. The memory of it now made her fingers tighten around her phone as the grounded passengers began to murmur around her. Vivian had never been good at accepting limitations, not when her mother worked 3 jobs, arthritic hands cleaning other people's homes to put her through business school, not when professors suggested she pursue more suitable careers, and certainly not when she'd mortgaged everything, including her grandmother's house, to start her own investment firm at 35. In her modest office with the perpetually flickering light that no electrician could fix, she kept a framed photo of her grandmother, a domestic worker who'd saved pennies in a Maxwell House coffee can her entire life, but never once flew on a plane. "Some spaces aren't meant for us," she'd told young Vivian, rubbing cocoa butter into cracked hands. "But you, child, you'll create your own." Those words had become both comfort and challenge. But Vivian didn't want to create separate spaces. She wanted to transform existing ones, to change what belonging looked like in America. Her assistant, Eleanor Gilbert, was the only person who truly understood what drove her. A sharp-witted woman in her 50s with a silver streak in her dark hair and reading glasses that doubled as armor, had faced her own battles in corporate America before a reduction in force eliminated her executive position. She'd followed Vivian from McKinley, taking a 40% cutback to help build something authentic. The board called again. Eleanor's voice came through Vivian's phone as the grounded passengers around her grew restless, their complaints creating a symphony of entitlement. "Meridian CEO is having what I can only describe as a Category 5 meltdown. Apparently, someone with significant influence has frozen their operations approval. Their stock is already dropping in after-hours trading." Vivian gazed out the airplane window at the still-attached jetway, where ground crew scrambled like disturbed ants. "How unfortunate," she said, the words cool but satisfaction warming her chest. "You're on that flight, aren't you?" Eleanor's tone shifted from professional to protective, the way it had when Vivian had worked 3 days straight during the Pacific Union negotiation. What happened? Vivian watched as Jack Dawson, the flight attendant, paled while reading a message on his phone. His eyes darted around the cabin, suddenly frantic. "Have my car brought around," Vivian said, instead of answering directly. "And call Jonah Ryan. Tell him the assessment is complete ahead of schedule." What Eleanor didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Vivian had already decided to save Meridian Airlines weeks ago. Their routes served communities other carriers had abandoned, communities like the one where her mother still lived, where flights meant hospital visits and funeral attendances, not business deals and vacations. But she had insisted on experiencing their service as an ordinary customer before signing. Now, watching the first-class passengers file past her toward the exit, their faces confused and irritated as privilege encountered inconvenience, Vivian felt something deeper than anger crystallize within her. It was resolution, a quiet, steely certainty that some lessons couldn't be taught in boardrooms or through policy memos. Thomas Ripley, now Meridian's desperate chief strategy officer, would soon discover exactly who held the power to ground an entire airline with a single phone call, and what it would cost to get it flying again. The terminal buzzed with displaced passengers as Vivian strode toward the Meridian Airlines executive offices, her heels striking the polished floor with military precision. Security guards recognized her immediately, not from the flight, but from the financial press that had once dubbed her the Fixer after she salvaged 3 failing companies in a single quarter. Doors opened without question, faces transformed from suspicion to deference in the space of a heartbeat. Inside, chaos reigned. Support staff rushed between offices with panicked expressions, phones rang unanswered, and in the center of it all, Thomas Ripley paced like a caged animal, his designer tie loosened, silver hair disheveled as he barked contradictory orders at cowering subordinates. "What do you mean, operational approval withdrawn? Who has that kind of—" He froze mid-sentence when he saw Vivian standing in the doorway, power emanating from her like a physical force. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something resembling fear. "Vivian, what a surprise!" "Is it?" Her voice was cool, controlled, the voice she used when negotiating acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "I was on your flagship route today, seat 2A. His face paled as recognition hit him, blood draining until the tan from his recent Bahamas trip looked painted on. "That was you? Listen, whatever happened was revealing," she finished, removing her jacket with deliberate slowness. "Very educational. I learned exactly what Meridian values and who it values." The room fell silent, conversations dying mid-word as staff sensed the power dynamic shifting beneath their feet. A man Vivian didn't recognize stepped forward through the tension, tall, with shoulders that suggested military service and eyes that held none of Thomas's evasiveness. "I'm Captain Daniel Ocean," he said, extending his hand. Unlike Ripley's nervous energy, he radiated a centered calm that seemed incongruous with the chaos around them. "I understand you were removed from first class on my flight." Their hands met, and Vivian noticed 3 things simultaneously: the wedding band on his finger, the slight calluses that spoke of work beyond the cockpit, and the way he held her gaze directly, not with the artificial deference of the security guards or the hostility of the first-class passengers, but with something unfamiliar and disarming. Recognition, perhaps. "The crew acted without protocol or decency," he continued, his voice carrying enough for everyone to hear. "I want to personally apologize and assure you that this isn't what we stand for." The warmth in his voice threatened to soften something in Vivian, a dangerous proposition when decisions affecting thousands required clarity, not compassion. Before she could respond, the door burst open, and Jack Dawson, the flight attendant who'd orchestrated her humiliation, was escorted in by Eleanor, whose expression suggested she'd enjoy nothing more than pushing him out the nearest emergency exit without a parachute. "You wanted to see everyone involved," Eleanor said quietly, positioning herself at Vivian's shoulder like a sentinel. Jack's smug expression evaporated when he realized who Vivian was. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Miss Ward, had I known your position—" "That's exactly the problem. My humanity should have been enough. My ticket should have been enough. But you needed to know my title to determine my worth." The room fell silent as Jonah Ryan, Vivian's legal counsel, entered with a leather portfolio. His bespoke suit and impassive expression gave nothing away as he placed 2 documents on the conference table with surgical precision. "The paperwork's ready. Either way, dissolution proceedings or the rescue package. Your call." Here was the moment of decision, crystallized into 2 stacks of paper. With one signature, Vivian could dismantle the company that had humiliated her, sending thousands of employees, including those who'd done nothing wrong, into unemployment during an economic downturn. With another, she could save it, potentially rewarding the very behavior that kept spaces like first-class cabins hostile to people who looked like her. Captain Ocean stepped closer, close enough that she caught the faint scent of his aftershave, something subtle and earthy. "Before you decide," he said, voice lowered for her alone, "there's something you should know. Thomas knew you were on that flight. He texted the crew before boarding." The revelation struck like lightning, illuminating the entire tableau in harsh clarity. This hadn't been random prejudice, it had been orchestrated. Thomas had gambled that humiliating her would drive her away from the deal permanently, allowing him to pursue the leveraged buyout he'd been quietly arranging with Pacific Capital, a move that would dismantle Meridian for parts but secure his golden parachute. "You set me up to fail," Vivian said, turning to Thomas, her voice deadly quiet. The room seemed to hold its breath as his silence offered confirmation more damning than any confession. In that frozen moment, with careers and communities hanging in the balance, Vivian felt the weight of her grandmother's coffee can savings and her mother's arthritis hands. She felt the responsibility of every door she'd forced open, not just for herself, but for those who would follow. The choice before her wasn't just business, it was justice. The evidence of Thomas's betrayal lay scattered across the conference table. Printouts of text messages, flight manifests with Vivian's name highlighted, and a draft presentation to Pacific Capital outlining how Meridian's routes could be carved up for profit once Vivian walked away from the deal. "You didn't just want me humiliated," Vivian said, her voice dangerously soft, as she studied the documents Eleanor had retrieved from Thomas's office. Thomas's earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced with the practiced contrition of a man who'd escaped consequences his entire life. "It was business, Vivian. Pacific Capital offered a clean exit, no strings, no community obligations. Your rescue package comes with too many conditions." Conditions like maintaining service to underserved communities, like not firing half the workforce? Captain Ocean's voice carried a quiet fury that matched Vivian's own. "Those aren't conditions, Ripley. That's basic decency." For a moment, their eyes met, and Vivian felt an unexpected alliance forming, not just professional, but something that resonated deeper, like recognition between two people who understood service beyond self-interest. The boardroom door opened, admitting a parade of Meridian executives who'd been summoned for emergency damage control. Among them was Charlotte DeGrassi, the airline's PR director, already spinning scenarios on her tablet. "We can frame this as a misunderstanding," Charlotte began, her voice smooth as polished marble. "A loyal employee protecting first-class standards. We'll offer Miss Ward lifetime platinum status, a public apology. My name is on the rescue package, not on your customer loyalty program." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Eleanor placed a file before Vivian, employee data from Meridian's 8,700 workers, including photos and family information. "This is Morris Taylor," Eleanor said, pointing to an image of an older black man in a ground crew uniform. 32 years at Meridian, 3 grandchildren he's putting through college. If the airline dissolves, he loses his pension. Page after page showed faces: flight attendants, mechanics, reservation agents, people whose livelihoods hung in the balance of Vivian's decision, people who had nothing to do with first-class cabin politics or Thomas's machinations. Captain Ocean moved closer, his presence both challenging and supportive. "What Thomas did is unforgivable," he said quietly, "but punishing everyone for it would make me exactly like him," Vivian finished. The realization settled over her with uncomfortable clarity. Thomas seized the opening. "Exactly. The board will remove me if that's what you want. Just sign the rescue package." "So you sacrifice yourself and emerge 6 months later at Pacific Capital?" Vivian's laugh was cold. "I don't think so." Outside the glass walls of the conference room, news crews had begun gathering. Charlotte's phone buzzed continuously with alerts. Social media was exploding with passenger accounts of the grounded flight, speculation about Meridian's financial collapse, and rumors of executive misconduct. "We're running out of time," Jonah warned, checking his watch. "The market's open in 12 hours. If we don't announce something definitive, the stock will plummet, and the rescue package won't be enough." Vivian felt the weight of every eye in the room: Thomas's calculating gaze, Eleanor's unwavering support, Captain Ocean's quiet intensity, and beyond the glass, the distant but real presence of thousands of employees whose futures she held in her hands. "I need to think," she said, rising from the table, "and I need to see something first." Without explanation, she walked out, Captain Ocean falling into step beside her. In the corridor, away from the others, he spoke softly. Whatever you decide, I respect your position, but there's something you should know about the communities Meridian serves. Show me, Vivian interrupted. Don't tell me. I want to see these communities myself. A smile touched his eyes. It would take days to visit them all. Then show me one, the one that matters most to you. As they walked away from the crisis room, Vivian knew she was breaking every rule of crisis management, stepping away from negotiations at the critical moment, entrusting her perspective to someone she barely knew. Yet something told her understanding Captain Ocean's connection to Meridian's service might reveal what Thomas's spreadsheets had concealed, the human cost behind every decision. Behind them, Thomas watched their departure with narrowed eyes, already dialing a number only he knew, a final desperate move to ensure that whatever Vivian discovered on her journey, it wouldn't be enough to save what he was determined to destroy. Captain Ocean's one community turned out to be Cooper's Landing, a remote town accessible only by Meridian's twice-weekly flights. As their chartered plane descended, Vivian saw what spreadsheets couldn't capture: a medical clinic where patients awaited air-delivered medications, families reuniting on the small airstrip, and commerce that depended entirely on reliable air service. This is one of 37 similar communities in our network, Daniel explained as they walked through town. Communities that other airlines abandoned years ago. At the local diner, they met Sarah Hamilton, an elderly woman whose eyes lit up when she recognized Daniel. "Captain, is my grandson with you today?" "Not today, Sarah, but he'll be on tomorrow's flight," Daniel assured her. As they shared coffee, Daniel revealed the truth. He'd grown up in a town like this, watching his mother die when bad weather prevented a medical evacuation. He'd become a pilot with one mission: ensuring no community suffered that isolation again. "Thomas knows these stories," Daniel said. "He just doesn't believe they matter against profit margins." Vivian's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Eleanor. "Thomas leaked story to the press. Headlines claiming you're holding airline hostage over personal slight. Stock falling. Need you back now." Alongside it was a photo that made Vivian's blood freeze. Thomas standing with Jack Dawson and Charlotte DeGrassi at a hasty press conference, portraying Vivian as an egomaniac destroying thousands of jobs over a seating misunderstanding. "The betrayal continues," she murmured, showing Daniel the screen. Their eyes met in silent understanding. The battle for Meridian had just become public and infinitely more complicated. Hello, my lovelies at Ducal Tales. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means everything, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you Team Vivian or Team Thomas? Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss the conclusion. The media ambush awaited Vivian the moment she stepped off the return flight. Camera flashes exploded like artillery, reporters shouting questions that were really accusations. "Ms. Ward, are you using your financial power to punish Meridian over a seating arrangement? Is it true you're holding 8,000 jobs hostage because of wounded pride?" Thomas's narrative had taken root with frightening speed, a privileged executive destroying working-class jobs over a personal slight. Outside Meridian's headquarters, actual employees had gathered with handmade signs: "Save our airline" and "Families, not feuds." "Don't engage," Eleanor advised, rushing them through the back entrance. "The board has called an emergency meeting. They're considering removing you from the rescue package negotiations." In the elevator, Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "CNN says you're ruining that airline. That's not my daughter." The words cut deeper than any headline. Even her mother believed Thomas's version.
The boardroom felt like a tribunal. Thomas sat at the head of the table, flanked by Charlotte and two board members Vivian recognized as Pacific Capital puppets. His expression was a masterpiece of fabricated concern. "Vivian, we're relieved you've returned," he began, voice dripping with false sincerity. "We've prepared a joint statement announcing your continued support for the rescue package, despite the unfortunate incident." He slid a document toward her, a press release that portrayed her as magnanimously overlooking the seating misunderstanding, while Thomas heroically saved the airline through a strategic partnership with Pacific Capital. "The rescue package remains intact," Thomas continued smoothly, "with minor adjustments to route structures. Daniel, who had been reviewing the fine print, looked up sharply. Minor? You're cutting 26 rural routes, including Cooper's Landing. Unprofitable routes, Charlotte interjected. The board has financial responsibilities. Vivian felt the walls closing in. Thomas had orchestrated the perfect trap. If she withdrew support, she'd be the villain who destroyed livelihoods over pride. If she signed, the communities that needed Meridian most would lose their lifeline, and Thomas would still win. "You've left me no options," Vivian said quietly. Thomas's smile was pure triumph. "Sometimes there aren't any. That's business." As on cue, Jack Dawson entered with a settlement agreement, a confidentiality clause preventing Vivian from ever discussing what happened on the flight, in exchange for her continued support of the modified rescue package. Daniel's hand found hers beneath the table, a momentary anchor in the storm. "There's always another way," he whispered, but his eyes held the same despair she felt. Outside, the employee protests had grown louder. Inside, the board members checked their watches impatiently. The markets would open in hours. Decisions couldn't wait. For the first time in her career, Vivian Ward had no strategy, no brilliant countermove. Thomas had outmaneuvered her, using her own principles against her. The communities would suffer, the employees would blame her, and Thomas would emerge unscathed, perhaps even heroic. The pen felt heavy as lead when Charlotte placed it in her hand. The document before her might save jobs, but at what cost to her soul? The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Then Eleanor slipped into the room and placed a folder beside Vivian. "You asked for this," she said simply, though Vivian had requested no such thing. Curious, Vivian opened it to find employee records, not just any employees, but the flight attendants and gate agents who had worked her fateful flight. Each personnel file contained performance reviews, incident reports, and something unexpected, previous complaints of discriminatory treatment, all systematically buried. Jack Dawson had 6 such complaints, all from passengers of color, all dismissed without investigation. These reports were flagged in the system, but never reached HR. Someone with executive access intervened each time. Vivian met Thomas's eyes across the table. The flicker of panic told her everything. "You didn't just target me," she said slowly. "This is a pattern." Daniel leaned forward. "The employee protests outside. They think they're protesting for you to sign. But what if they knew the truth? What if they knew their jobs were actually secure with your original rescue package, and that Thomas is the one selling them out to Pacific Capital?" Something shifted in Vivian's mind, not just a strategy, but a recognition. She'd been playing Thomas's game, fighting on his battlefield, but she'd built her career by changing the rules. "I need 30 minutes, Vivian announced, rising from the table with newfound confidence. "The markets open in 3 hours, Thomas objected. "There isn't time." "Make time," Vivian replied, already moving toward the door with Eleanor and Daniel in tow. In a small conference room down the hall, Vivian laid out her counterattack. "Thomas controls the board and the narrative because no one sees the full picture. We need to change that." Daniel made a quick call to the pilots' union representative, while Eleanor contacted Morris Taylor, the longtime ground crew worker whose pension hung in the balance. Vivian herself reached out to the one person whose voice would cut through the noise, her mother. "I need you to come down here," she told her mother, "and bring Grandma's coffee can." 40 minutes later, Vivian re-entered the boardroom. Behind her stood an unlikely alliance: union representatives, long-time employees, local community leaders from Cooper's Landing who had flown in overnight, and her mother carrying a rusted Maxwell House can. Thomas's face darkened. "This is a closed board meeting. These people have no place." "Actually, they do," Vivian interrupted, "because they're about to become shareholders." She placed a new document on the table, a revised rescue package structured as an employee community ownership plan.
The coffee can her grandmother had filled with savings would provide the symbolic first investment. "Your strategy depends on me being either the villain or the savior," Vivian said to Thomas, "but I'm offering a third option. Meridian doesn't need a savior, it needs owners who care more than profit margins." For the first time, uncertainty crept in Thomas's expression. "The communities you planned to abandon will hold seats on the board. Employees will have profit sharing and protection from the kind of discrimination that's been systematically buried." Charlotte DeGrassi, sensing the shifting tide, edged away from Thomas. "From a PR perspective, this is actually brilliant. Airline saved through historic community employee ownership. That's a headline that sells itself." The board members exchanged glances, calculating new angles and opportunities. Daniel stepped forward, his hand finding Vivian's again, this time above the table for everyone to see. "This plan saves every job and every route. It honors commitments to communities while creating a sustainable business model." Thomas's last defense crumbled when Morris Taylor spoke up. "Mr. Ripley told us Miss Ward was trying to destroy our airline over a seat, but these documents show he planned to sell our routes and cut our pensions all along." The room erupted as employees realized they'd been manipulated. In the chaos, Thomas made one final desperate attempt. "The Pacific Capital deal is already in motion. This community ownership fantasy will never—" "Pacific Capital pulled out 20 minutes ago," Eleanor announced, holding up her phone. "They don't want the public relations disaster of fighting against community ownership. Their statement just hit the newswires." As the reality of defeat settled over Thomas, Vivian felt no triumph, only clarity. This had never been about revenge, it had been about transformation, about ensuring spaces like first-class cabins and boardrooms could no longer remain exclusive clubs where worth was determined by appearance rather than humanity. The pen that had felt so heavy before now moved across the page with purpose as Vivian signed the new rescue package, not as a savior, but as a partner in something revolutionary. The transformation of Meridian Airlines unfolded like a revolution, swift, decisive, and irreversible. The morning news cycle that Thomas had primed to destroy Vivian instead broadcast images of her standing shoulder to shoulder with employees, her mother's Maxwell House coffee can raised high as a symbol of generational persistence. "My grandmother saved pennies her entire life, but never flew," Vivian told reporters, her voice steady beneath the glare of cameras. "Today, her savings become the cornerstone of an airline that will never again mistake wealth for worth." Behind the cameras, Thomas watched his carefully constructed world disintegrate. His phone buzzed continuously, Pacific Capital executives distancing themselves, board members rescinding support, and finally the chairman requesting his resignation. In the executive suite, now converted into transition headquarters, Vivian supervised the implementation of the new ownership structure. Employee representatives pored over route maps with community leaders, identifying sustainable service patterns that honored both business necessity and human need. Daniel's presence beside her had become natural, their partnership evolving into something that transcended professional alliance. His understanding of flight operations complemented her financial expertise, creating solutions neither could have developed alone. "You've accomplished the impossible," he said during a rare quiet moment, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Most people would have walked away." "Walking away was never an option," Vivian replied, remembering her grandmother's words. "Some spaces aren't meant for us until we transform them." Their moment was interrupted by Eleanor's urgent approach. "Thomas is refusing to surrender his access credentials. IT says he's downloaded sensitive files in the last hour." Daniel's expression hardened. "The flight manifests. If he still has those, he could identify every employee who supported us," Vivian finished, already moving toward Thomas's office. They found him frantically gathering personal items, his usual polished appearance disheveled. When he saw Vivian, his mask of corporate courtesy finally slipped completely. "You think you've won?" he sneered, abandoning all pretense. "You've just sentenced this airline to a slow death. Communities and employees can't run a business. They'll be begging for a bailout within a year." Vivian approached his desk with measured steps. That fear, that certainty that only people like you deserve power, that's why you failed, Thomas. You never understood that dignity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. "Spare me the lecture," he spat. "I've still got the original flight manifests and crew reports. One call to my contacts at the Regulatory Commission about your strong-arm tactics, and your community ownership fantasy collapses." Daniel stepped forward. "Those documents aren't yours to take." Thomas's laugh was bitter. "Try proving that in court while your precious communities lose their air service." The standoff crackled with tension until a new voice joined the conversation. "I believe I can help with that," said Jack Dawson from the doorway, his first-class confidence replaced by genuine contrition. "I've already provided copies of all your text messages to legal, including your instructions to create a seating issue for Miss Ward." Thomas's lunged for his laptop, but Daniel was faster, stepping between Thomas and his final attempt at sabotage. "You instructed your employees to discriminate against passengers," Vivian said quietly. "That's not just morally reprehensible, it's legally actionable." The fight drained from Thomas's body as Jack handed over a USB drive containing the evidence that would ensure Thomas's corporate career was finished. "Why?" asked Thomas, bewilderment replacing anger. "I was protecting your job." Jack straightened his uniform tie, the same one he'd worn while humiliating Vivian. "No, sir, you were protecting your power. There's a difference." As security arrived to escort Thomas from the building, Vivian felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only resolution that a cycle had been broken. This wasn't about personal vindication, but systemic change. Later, as the first flight under the new Meridian structure prepared for departure to Cooper's Landing, Vivian stood on the tarmac watching ground crew load critical medical supplies. Morris Taylor supervised the loading, his decades of experience now valued with a seat on the operations board. Daniel approached in his captain's uniform, the evening light catching the new Meridian emblem, a circular design incorporating a coffee can, a reminder of humble beginnings and essential dignity. "First flight's always the most important," he said, extending his hand. "Care to join us in the cockpit?" The invitation represented more than a gesture. It symbolized the breaking of barriers that had once seemed impenetrable. As Vivian accepted, she noticed Jack Dawson among the cabin crew, his expression solemn as he nodded in acknowledgement of a journey that had changed them all. "Cooper's Landing is just the beginning," Daniel said as they boarded. "There are dozens of communities waiting to see if we meant what we said about transformation." Vivian touched the small replica of her grandmother's coffee can she now wore as a pendant. "They won't have to wait long," she promised, stepping across the threshold that separated ground from sky, past from future. Above them, the evening star appeared, the first light in a sky that belonged to everyone. 1 year later, Vivian stood at the podium in Meridian's headquarters, now transformed into an open, collaborative space where hierarchies had been replaced by circular workstations. Behind her, a wall of photographs displayed the airline's 37 rural destinations, communities that now had reliable air service, medical supply chains, and economic lifelines. "Our first year as a community employee-owned airline has exceeded all projections," she announced to assembled staff and press. "Passenger satisfaction is up 42%, employee retention has reached 96%, and most importantly, not a single community has lost service." The applause wasn't just for the numbers, but for what they represented. A reimagining of what business could be when dignity became a core value rather than an afterthought. In the front row, Vivian's mother sat beside Daniel's parents, unlikely friends united by their shared children's vision. Beside them was Morris Taylor, now head of Meridian's apprenticeship program, training young people from underserved communities for aviation careers. Jack Dawson had found redemption as Meridian's new diversity and inclusion officer, turning his mistake into a mission to ensure no passenger ever felt unwelcome again. The training program he developed had become an industry standard, adopted by 3 other airlines. As for Thomas Ripley, his attempt to file a wrongful termination lawsuit had collapsed when evidence of his discriminatory instructions became public. Last Vivian heard, he was teaching at a business school, perhaps the best place for him to learn what he had failed to understand about true leadership. After the presentation, Daniel found Vivian in the quiet of what had once been the executive dining room, now a community garden where employees grew fresh produce for local food banks. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a first-class ticket, not for Meridian, but for a small specialty airline that still flew the vintage DC-3 her grandmother had once watched overhead but never boarded. "Some journeys we need to complete for those who couldn't," Daniel said softly. When he took her hand, the connection between them felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a truth they both understood, that transformation required both vision and heart, both strength and vulnerability. The coffee can pendant at Vivian's throat caught the sunlight as she leaned toward him, their shared future as boundless as the sky they had both claimed. "First class," she whispered against his lips, "was always meant for everyone." My beautiful ducal family, I hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched mine to tell it. Tell me in the comments how Vivian's journey resonated with you. Have you ever had to transform a space that wasn't meant for you? Join our ducal family by subscribing if this tale of dignity and justice spoke to your soul. Until next time, remember that true first class has nothing to do with where you sit and everything to do with how you see yourself.